The last ice age lingers for many thousands of years, yet its grip begins to loosen as vast sheets of ice retreat from the northern continents. Enormous glaciers that once spread across Europe, North America, and Asia shrink back toward the poles, leaving behind valleys carved deep plains, scraped clean, and lakes newly formed from the meltwater. Global temperatures rise not steadily, but in a series of jolts and pauses, reshaping every ecosystem on Earth. Where once tundra stretched far southward, now forests creep forward. Where deserts lay dry, rains return. And in this shifting balance between cold and warmth, humans find themselves living in landscapes that are more varied, more fertile, and more demanding than ever before. Across the Near East, patches of land that once lay locked in ice become temperate and green. The Fertile Crescent, an arc spanning from the Levant through northern Mesopotamia into the Zagros foothills, transforms from sparse steppe to a mosaic of rivers, wetlands, and grassy plains. Here, wild stands of wheat, barley, and rye spread across the landscape, nourished by seasonal rains. To the north, oak and pistachio groves root themselves in once barren ground, drawing animals and people alike. Along rivers, reeds cluster thickly, offering material for mats, baskets, and shelter. It is within these environments, rich yet unpredictable, that humans begin to consider staying a little longer each season. For much of their existence, people live as mobile foragers, moving with herds of gazelle aurochs and wild sheep, never tethered to one place for long. Their survival depends on flexibility, the ability to move when resources dwindle. But after the ice retreats, abundance no longer always lies elsewhere. It can be found here for many months at a time. Wild grains ripen in summer. Herds linger in valleys where water flows steadily. Fish fill river channels when the floods recede. In these new landscapes, the rhythm of return begins. Families who once camped only briefly near a river or spring now find reasons to return to the same place again the next year, and then again the next. Archaeologists recognize this shift in layers of stone tools, grinding stones, and discarded animal bones at sites like Ohalo II in the Jordan Valley and later at Natufian hamlets scattered across the Levant. These traces show a pattern: people coming back, building hearths anew, and reusing spaces in ways that hint at the earliest permanence. A detail emerges in the evidence that speaks to this gradual change: the presence of grinding stones, far larger than those carried by nomadic foragers. Such heavy stones are not suited for long-distance travel. They suggest that people choose to leave them behind, ready for use on a future visit. Alongside these stones lie charred seeds of wild cereals preserved in the earth. They mark moments when families gather the harvest, parch it over fire, and grind it into flour. The tools wait for their owner's return, becoming fixtures of place, signaling a subtle shift toward rootedness. Yet the retreat of ice and the growth of fertile valleys also bring uncertainty. The climate of the early Holocene does not settle quickly into calm. Sudden cold snaps, such as the Younger Dryas around 12 to 900 years ago, plunge regions back into near-glacial conditions. In these intervals, lakes' dry grasses shrink and herds migrate away, forcing humans to adjust once more. Archaeologists still debate how these swings in climate influence the choice to stay or move. Did scarcity push groups to experiment with cultivation near their camps? Or did abundance itself allow the luxury of remaining in place? The precise balance of cause and effect remains uncertain. One of the enduring mysteries of this transition. At the scale of the planet, the retreat of the great ice sheets transforms the shape of the world itself. Oceans once locked away, as frozen mass rise steadily as meltwater pours into the seas. In total, more than 100 meters of sea level rise redraws coastlines across every continent. Plains, once walked by hunters, become submerged, and islands, once part of larger land masses, stand alone. For humans, this means that landscapes they had known for generations vanish beneath the waves, while new shorelines open possibilities for fishing and settlement. The entire world is in motion, not just people, but the very ground beneath their feet. Within this planetary shift, the beginnings of sedentary life seem both inevitable and fragile. To imagine the scale of these changes, one might consider that the glaciers retreat over distances greater than the length from Paris to Seoul, and seas rise high enough to erase valleys large enough to hold entire modern nations. Against this vast backdrop, the decision of a small group of people to remain longer in a valley near a river seems almost invisible. Yet in its quiet persistence, it is among the most consequential changes in human history. Archaeological sites from this time show circles of post holes that once supported huts, traces of hearths blackened with repeated use, and scatterings of stone tools that indicate activities beyond short visits. The Natufians living in the Levant around 14,000 to 12,000 years ago are among the best-known examples of these early semi-sedentary groups. They bury their dead within their camps, sometimes adorned with shell beads carried from coasts many days' walk away. These shells, small and delicate, testify to connections between places to trade or exchange networks that link valleys and coasts. Their presence in inland sites is a lesser-known yet powerful detail, a reminder that staying did not mean isolation. Even in early villages, movement and contact with distant places continued. Still mysteries remain. Did the Natufians settle because of the abundance of wild cereals? Or did their social bonds and burial rituals anchor them as much as food did? Was permanence a matter of ecology or of memory and meaning? Archaeology provides fragments of answers, but the lived experience of these people, their decisions and reasoning, are forever out of reach. This uncertainty lingers like the cool shadow of the receding ice, a reminder that human history is shaped not only by what can be measured, but also by what remains unspoken in the earth. The retreat of the Ice Age is both a global transformation and a local invitation. It allows rivers to flow stronger, plants to spread further, and people to remain longer. In these first steps towards sedentary life, there is no sudden change, no clear boundary between wandering and staying. Instead, there is a gradual weaving of people into place of fire pits, rebuilt of stones left behind, of seeds gathered and ground. The world warms, seas rise, forests spread, and in this shifting balance humans find themselves pausing perhaps for the first time to let the earth around them hold their lives for more than a season. In the millennia following the retreat of the great ice sheets, human groups move with the seasons as they always have, yet patterns begin to change. Campsites once abandoned after a short stay are visited again, sometimes year after year, until they grow into familiar landmarks. In river valleys and along lake shores of the Levant, Anatolia, and the Zagros foothills, families return to the same ground, rebuilding shelters, in the same circles, tending fires in the same hearths, and leaving behind heavier objects that mark a growing sense of permanence. The landscape becomes layered not only with natural cycles, but also with human memory. Archaeologists recognize this shift in the remains of Natufian hamlets, where stone foundations, post holes, and hearths appear in repeated layers. What distinguishes these camps is not grandeur or durability, but rhythm. Instead of wandering widely, people choose to return to the same place at the same season, drawn by ripening cereals, spawning fish, or game, moving through predictable valleys. These places become seasonal homes, part of a circuit of movement that is narrower than before, binding groups to landscapes in new ways. One striking detail that emerges from these sites is the reuse of hearths over decades. Layers of ash build up sometimes half a meter thick, showing that fire is kindled again and again in the same hollow. Such evidence suggests that families do not simply happen upon a convenient spot, but deliberately seek it out, drawn back to warmth, familiarity, and the resources nearby. Alongside these hearths, storage pits dug into the ground hold seeds and nuts, sometimes lined with stone or clay to keep them dry. These pits reveal more than practical ingenuity. They suggest planning for return, a trust that the camp will not be lost or forgotten, but revisited when the seasons turn. The choice to return to the same place year after year reflects more than convenience. It marks a change in the relationship between people and land. In older patterns, mobility ensures survival. Movement is security. But now, the land itself becomes a partner offering resources at predictable times. Wild barley ripens in June, gazelle herds move through valleys in spring, and fish gather in shallows after floods recede. The rhythms of nature encourage human groups to weave their own cycles around these patterns, anchoring themselves to specific waters, groves, and fields. This subtle shift, seasonal return, rather than permanent settlement, lays the groundwork for the later step into villages. The transition is not uniform. Some groups continue to range widely, while others embrace the new rhythms. Archaeologists find evidence of semi-sedentary life in regions as diverse as the Levant and northern China, where people return to sites seasonally to gather millet or acorns. Yet the Fertile Crescent provides some of the clearest traces, in part because preservation is better, and in part because the ecological balance there makes return especially rewarding. Abundant plant foods combined with herds of gazelle and fallow deer offer enough variety to sustain longer stays. These resources reduce the need to travel far and allow for experimentation in living more permanently on the land. One lesser-known detail from this era is the construction of brushwood huts that leave only faint traces but reveal the scale of human effort invested in seasonal homes. At Ohalo, too, a site by the Sea of Galilee dating to around 23,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the outlines of circular huts made of branches covered in grasses. Inside these huts lay stone tools, grinding stones and hearths, suggesting extended occupation. Though this site predates the Natufians, it foreshadows their pattern of returning to familiar ground. What distinguishes the Natufian period is not simply building huts, but reusing them, embedding them into the landscape as enduring places. Unresolved mysteries remain. What motivates the decision to return rather than move elsewhere? Was it primarily ecological abundance, or did social and symbolic ties to particular locations play a role? Some archaeologists suggest that burial practices may have anchored groups to certain sites. Natufian burials found beneath house floors or within camp boundaries hint at a deeper bond where the presence of ancestors ties the living to place. Yet whether these practices were cause or consequence of seasonal permanence is still debated. The link between memory ritual and settlement remains one of the most intriguing questions of this period. At the scale of the planet, these human choices unfold during a time of dramatic transformation. As ice sheets melt, rivers swell with meltwater lakes form and expand and coastlines shift. The hydrological cycle intensifies with rains feeding new forests and wetlands. Entire biomes migrate sometimes hundreds of kilometers within a few generations. For humans, the changing world provides both opportunity and challenge. Camps become seasonal homes, not only because food is abundant, but also because landscapes themselves are in flux, demanding that people adapt to shifting ecologies. The rhythm of seasonal return may represent a strategy of stability within a world that is anything but stable. The scale of movement compared to earlier times also changes. Instead of following migratory herds across distances of hundreds of kilometers, families may now confine themselves to circuits of tens of kilometers cycling between lowland valleys in winter and uplands in summer. To imagine this scale, one might think of a range no larger than the distance from a modern city to its surrounding countryside. Yet within that range, entire lives are lived and repeated across generations. This narrowing of movement has profound consequences, concentrating human activity in particular places and setting the stage for permanent villages. Archaeological evidence reveals that these seasonal homes foster increasing investment in place. Stone walls built to support huts, grinding slabs too heavy to move, and communal storage pits all signal that people expect to return. The presence of shell ornaments from distant coasts in inland sites shows that even as groups settle more often in one spot, they maintain networks of exchange with others who wander further. These ornaments, often overlooked, demonstrate that staying does not mean isolation. Rather, seasonal homes may become nodes in wider webs of movement, connecting rivers, mountains, and coasts through human interaction. Still, much about these camps remains uncertain. Did people view them as temporary convenience or as beginnings of something more permanent? Archaeologists see continuity in stone foundations and hearths, but the lived experience of those who built and returned to them is lost. The gradual pace of change blurs any clear distinction between camp and village. What we see in the archaeological record is a spectrum with mobility on one end and permanence on the other, and with humans shifting slowly but decisively along it. By the end of this era, the pattern is unmistakable. Camps that once lasted a season now endure across lifetimes, remembered and rebuilt by generations, who see the same river bend, the same grove, the same hill each year. Seasonal homes are not yet villages, but they are more than camps. They are places where memory begins to accumulate, where the land itself becomes part of human identity. In this quiet transformation, the groundwork is laid for the villages that will soon follow, anchored not just in resources, but in the enduring ties between people and place. In the valleys and foothills of the Fertile Crescent, an important shift takes place as human groups begin to rely more heavily on the harvest of wild plants. For countless generations, people have gathered seeds, fruits, nuts, and roots. But after the Ice Age ends, certain grains grow in such abundance that they become the backbone of seasonal return. Wild stands of wheat, barley, and rye spread across the hillsides, nourished by winter rains and ripening in the summer sun. Families gather together to harvest these grasses, cutting stalks with flint blades, or pulling the seeds by hand, filling baskets and containers with food that can be carried, stored, and ground into flour. The seasonal rhythm of ripening cereals brings people back to the same locations each year, concentrating their activity in valleys and plains where these plants grow thickest. Archaeological evidence for this shift lies in the charred remains of seeds preserved in hearths and storage pits, and in the stone tools used to process them. Mortars and pestles grinding slabs and handstones become increasingly common, and many of them are far too large and heavy to be carried from place to place. These tools are not only functional, but symbolic of a change in lifestyle, as they anchor families to particular spots where they can be reused year after year. Alongside these tools, sickle blades appear often with a glossy sheen produced by the repeated cutting of grasses. This sheen, called sickle gloss, is one of the clearest markers of cereal harvesting preserved across millennia in stone. The presence of these tools marks the beginning of a deeper engagement with plants, a step that foreshadows domestication. The act of gathering wild grains is more than simple subsistence. It demands careful observation of the land. Families learn when the grasses flower, when seeds swell in their husks, and when the heads of grain bend under their own weight. They watch for signs of rain that might spoil a harvest, or winds that might scatter seeds. Harvesting requires timing, cooperation, and planning, all of which deepen the bond between people and place. The seeds themselves are carried back to camps, parched over fire to prevent sprouting, and then ground into flour for gruel or bread-like cakes baked on hot stones. The effort required is immense, but the reward is a food that can be stored and shared, a resource more reliable than the unpredictable hunt. A lesser-known detail from this era is the presence of querns and grinding stones buried within the floors of houses at later Natufian sites. These stones, often worn smooth by years of use, were sometimes placed deliberately under the ground, suggesting that they carried meaning beyond utility. Perhaps they marked continuity between generations, linking the labor of the past with the lives of the present. Such practices hint at the growing significance of grains not only as food, but as part of cultural identity, embedded in memory and ritual. Mysteries remain about the precise path from gathering to cultivation. Archaeologists debate whether humans first spread seeds deliberately, or whether the act of harvesting and discarding naturally encouraged plants to grow near camps. Some suggest that as people carried seeds in baskets, kernels spilled along paths and sprouted in disturbed soil, creating patches of grain close to dwellings. Others argue that deliberate sowing began when groups noticed that seeds scattered on bare ground returned as usable plants in the next season. The distinction is subtle but profound, and it remains unresolved. What is clear is that human presence and activity shaped the distribution of these plants long before full domestication took hold. On a planetary scale, the shift to harvesting grains reflects wider ecological changes. As the Holocene stabilizes after the swings of the younger, dry as global climates become warmer and wetter, supporting the spread of grasses across large regions. In places where rainfall is reliable and soils are rich, grasses flourish in dense stands, providing humans with unprecedented opportunities to exploit them. This pattern is not limited to the Fertile Crescent. In East Asia, wild millet becomes a staple in similar contexts, while in the Americas, plants like goosefoot and amaranth begin to enter human diets. The reliance on grasses represents a broad trend shaped by global climate, yet expressed locally in diverse ways. The scale of this gathering is immense when measured against earlier forms of subsistence. Hunting yields bursts of meat that spoil quickly, while root digging offers modest returns. By contrast, a single field of ripened barley can yield tens of thousands of seeds, each one a concentrated packet of calories. The amount harvested in a few days could feed a family for weeks. To imagine the scale, Consider that the caloric yield of 1 hectare of wild cereals may equal the meat of several gazelles, yet the cereals can be stored for months. Such abundance encourages storage planning and return creating conditions where people can think in longer cycles than before. At sites like Abu Huraira in Syria, archaeologists have uncovered vast quantities of wild plant remains, including barley, rye, and lentils, alongside grinding stones and sickle blades. The scale of plant processing there is extraordinary, suggesting that entire communities work together to gather and prepare harvests. The bones of animals at the same site show that hunting continued, yet the balance begins to shift. Plants provide the reliable base while animals supplement the diet. This combination stabilizes food supplies and makes longer stays at camps possible. Yet uncertainty still surrounds the social implications of grain gathering. Did larger harvests encourage sharing within communities, or did they create tensions over storage and ownership? The archaeological record shows storage pits and communal facilities, but it cannot reveal how resources were distributed or contested. Some researchers speculate that grains may have played a role in feasting or ritual, not just daily subsistence. The labor of harvesting and grinding shared across groups may have reinforced social bonds as much as it filled bellies. These questions remain open, highlighting the complexity of the transition from gathering to farming. For those living through it, the harvesting of wild grains likely felt both familiar and new. It built upon ancient skills of foraging, yet demanded greater coordination and investment. It tied families more firmly to the land, yet left open the freedom to move when needed. It was a step in a long process, gradual and uneven, but decisive in its consequences. In the hum of grinding stones, in the shine of polished sickle blades, and in the charred seeds preserved in hearths, we glimpse the beginnings of a transformation that would eventually anchor humans to permanent villages. In this way, the gathering of wild grains stands as one of the quiet revolutions of prehistory. It is not sudden, not marked by sharp boundaries or clear decisions, but by gradual accumulation of seeds of knowledge of ties to place. Families return to the same fields each year, harvest the same stands of barley, and grind the same stones until grooves wear deep. In their choices, they set in motion a path that will lead centuries later to the first cultivated fields and the rise of the earliest villages. Among the most enduring traces of human presence in the archaeological record are hearths. Fire has long been a companion of humankind, used for warmth, cooking, and protection. But in the millennia following the Ice Age, its role begins to change in subtle yet profound ways. In seasonal camps scattered across the Levant and the Fertile Crescent, archaeologists uncover hearths that are not single-use fire pits abandoned after one occupation, but structures reused over decades and even centuries. The layers of ash charcoal and burnt stone build up in thick deposits, showing that fires are kindled again and again in the same hollow. These repeated uses mark the shift from temporary encampments to places with continuity where memory and labor accumulate in the earth itself. The permanence of hearths is closely tied to the emergence of semi-sedentary life. When people return to the same site season after season, they rebuild shelters, but the fire remains in the same place. Some hearths are shallow scoops lined with stone, others more elaborate, built up with clay to form ovens. At Natufian sites, circular stone structures contain central hearths, their positions fixed within the layout of the dwelling. The presence of these enduring fire pits transforms the experience of camp life. Instead of the fire being a fleeting flame on the open ground, it becomes an anchor, around which daily life revolves. Families cook, share food, and gather in its warmth, returning each year to rekindle the same spot until the hearth becomes as much a marker of home as the walls that surround it. One detail that speaks to this permanence is the discovery of burnt seeds and animal bones embedded in ash layers, evidence of meals shared across generations. At some sites, hearths preserve the remains of fish bones from river harvests, gazelle bones from seasonal hunts, and charred grains from cereal gathering. Together they provide a record not just of subsistence, but of tradition of repeated acts carried out in the same place over time. The hearth becomes a repository of memory, linking past and present through fire and ash. The transition to permanent hearths raises unresolved questions about the social organization of early communities. Were hearths shared among families, or did each household maintain its own fire? Archaeologists sometimes find multiple hearths within a single settlement, suggesting both private and communal use. The presence of ovens large enough to bake bread for many may hint at communal feasts or gatherings. Yet the precise role of these structures in daily life remains uncertain. Were they practical necessities, or did they also carry symbolic meaning, binding groups together through shared flame? The debate continues, for the hearth is at once a physical feature and a cultural center, its significance layered like the ash it contains. At the planetary scale, the appearance of permanent hearths coincides with broader climatic stabilization in the early Holocene. As the wild swings of the last glacial period subside, environments become more predictable with regular rainfall and stable seasons. This stability fosters the growth of plants and the presence of game in consistent patterns, allowing humans to invest in places with greater confidence. Fire becomes a visible marker of this investment, no longer a tool used wherever needed, but a permanent fixture in a known landscape. In this way, the permanence of hearths reflects not only human choice, but the wider rhythm of Earth itself, settling into a new climate regime. The scale of permanence is striking when measured across time. A hearth used for 50 years might span the lives of several generations. Over centuries, layers of ash accumulate like tree rings, preserving the sequence of meals, seasons, and returns. To stand at one of these sites today is to see not a single moment frozen in time, but a record of continuity stretching longer than many modern buildings endure. The endurance of a hearth thus becomes a measure of the human shift from fleeting camps to enduring places, from mobility to rootedness. A lesser-known but significant detail is the presence of lime plaster floors associated with some hearths in later Natufian and early Neolithic sites. The production of plaster requires heating limestone to high temperatures in kilns, a process that consumes large amounts of fuel. The appearance of such technology suggests that fire is no longer only for cooking, but also for altering the very materials of daily life. The plastered floors provide durable, clean surfaces within dwellings, showing an investment in permanence that goes beyond the needs of a single season. These technological advances, rooted in the mastery of fire, foreshadow the architectural complexity of the first true villages. Mysteries remain about the symbolic role of fire in this transition. In many later cultures, hearths are associated with household identity, continuity, and ritual. Was the same true for these early communities? Some archaeologists note that burials sometimes occur near hearths, or that hearths are rebuilt directly over earlier ones, suggesting continuity of place and meaning. Yet without written records, we cannot know how people perceived these flames or the ash that accumulated around them. The hearth may have been simply practical, or it may have carried layers of meaning now lost to time. As the Holocene advances, Permanent hearths become more widespread, appearing not only in the Levant, but across regions where humans begin to linger longer. In Anatolia, central hearths appear in early Neolithic houses at sites like Çatalhöyük, where entire communities revolve around clusters of dwellings with fixed ovens and fireplaces. These examples lie centuries later than the Natufians, yet they illustrate the trajectory set in motion by the first permanent hearths. Fire moves from being a mobile companion to a fixed center of community life, shaping architecture, diet, and ritual alike. For those who lived through this transition, the hearth must have felt like a point of continuity amid change. Seasons shifted, herds moved, plants ripened and withered, yet the fire remained in the same place, rekindled year after year. The permanence of the hearth offered stability not only in practical terms, but in the sense of belonging. A family returning to a familiar site would find the stones of their hearth still in place, the ash of previous fires still beneath their feet. In this way, the hearth embodied memory, identity, and connection to place long before villages became permanent. The story of the first permanent hearths is thus a story of continuity, of people choosing to root their lives in familiar ground through fire. It reflects the larger trajectory of human history, where permanence grows from repetition, and where the small act of rekindling a fire each year lays the foundation for enduring settlement. These hearths, humble in form yet immense in significance, illuminate the quiet transformation that leads from wandering camps to villages fixed in place. They remind us that permanence begins not with walls or fields, but with fire glowing steadily in the same hollow, drawing families back through seasons and generations until the land itself becomes home. As humans linger longer in seasonal camps and return year after year, they begin to notice new possibilities in the earth itself. Along the banks of rivers and lakes, fine clays lie exposed, soft when wet and hardening when dried in the sun. These clays are at first used in simple ways to line storage pits against moisture, to daub the walls of huts, or to patch cracks in hearths. Over time, experimentation leads to a quiet transformation. Clay can be shaped, molded, and baked into forms that endure, offering humans their first containers, stronger than basket skins or woven nets. The earth beneath their feet becomes a material that reshapes daily life, one that makes staying in place more practical and more rewarding. The earliest known use of clay for containers predates full farming. At sites like Tel es Sultan, later Jericho, and in other Neolithic settlements, archaeologists find fragments of fired clay vessels, some plain and some decorated with incised lines. Yet even before pottery becomes widespread, people use clay in smaller ways. Natufian communities in the Levant press clay into beads and figurines, suggesting that its malleability is valued as much for symbolism as for utility. Clay seals are also found, sometimes impressed with cord or basket patterns, hinting at its role in securing or marking stored goods. The presence of these early clay artifacts reveals that the material enters human life not suddenly, but gradually through many experiments and uses. A lesser-known detail is the discovery of unfired clay balls, found in early settlements, often hardened by accident near hearths. These objects may have served as cooking aids, heated and then placed among grains or in baskets to keep food warm. Such evidence suggests that humans explore the properties of clay long before formal pottery making begins. The material becomes part of daily routines woven into the fabric of semi-sedentary life in ways both practical and symbolic. The permanence offered by clay changes how food is stored and prepared. Seeds that once had to be consumed quickly can now be kept dry and safe in lined pits or clay jars. Liquids such as water, milk, or broth, once carried in skins, can be contained in vessels that last for years. This capacity for storage reinforces the value of staying in one place, encouraging families to invest further in their camps and return more reliably each season. Clay also allows for new cooking methods, as vessels can withstand prolonged heating, expanding diets, and deepening the reliance on gathered grains and legumes. Mysteries remain about how quickly people recognized the full potential of clay. Did they understand from the beginning that firing clay in a hot fire would produce durable pottery? Or did such knowledge emerge only after generations of accident and observation? Archaeologists find early pottery fragments scattered across many regions, but the pathways to its invention are diverse. In some places, pottery appears early, in others much later, suggesting that cultural choices and local needs shape the adoption of clay technology. The precise moment when clay moves from lining pits and patching hearths to forming full vessels is unclear, an unresolved transition that reflects the complexity of innovation in prehistory. At a planetary scale, the discovery of clay as a resource reflects the wider environmental changes of the Holocene. As rivers shift and floodplains expand, fine sediments accumulate, creating the clays that humans find and use. In wetter climates, clay-rich soils are abundant, easily accessible near water sources where camps are built. The material world itself offers new possibilities, and humans respond with creativity. The use of clay thus represents not only cultural change, but also the interplay between geology, climate, and human need. The scale of clay's impact is significant when compared with earlier technologies. A woven basket may last a season, a skin bag perhaps a year or two, but a clay pot can endure for decades if handled carefully. To imagine the difference, one might compare the effort of weaving dozens of baskets each year with the labor of shaping and firing a single vessel that could serve a household for much of a lifetime. Clay reduces the constant demand for replacement, allowing time and energy to be invested in other pursuits. This durability deepens the permanence of settlements, tying human life more closely to place. Archaeological evidence also shows that clay use is not limited to the utilitarian. Figurines shaped from clay appear in many early villages, including those of the pre-pottery Neolithic. Some represent animals, others human forms, and their purpose is debated. Were they tokens of ritual, symbols of fertility, or teaching tools for shaping skills? The mystery endures. But what is clear is that clay enters the realm of symbolism as well as function. Its malleability invites creativity, allowing humans to express ideas and beliefs in physical form. The presence of figurines in early settlements reminds us that the move toward villages is not only about subsistence, but also about meaning, memory, and culture. In some early settlements, clay technology develops alongside stone architecture. At sites like Jericho, mud brick walls rise, formed from clay mixed with straw and dried in the sun. These bricks, light yet durable, allow for larger and more stable structures than brushwood or stone alone. The use of clay in architecture marks another step toward permanence, as buildings can now be repaired and rebuilt with relative ease. The land itself becomes a source of building material, reinforcing the relationship between people and place. Yet, uncertainty persists about how widespread these practices are at first. Some groups continue to rely on portable containers and temporary shelters, while others embrace clay more fully. The uneven spread of the technology reflects both ecological variation and cultural choice. Not all groups need or desire heavy vessels, and mobility remains valuable for many. Clay becomes part of a spectrum of adaptations more pronounced where permanence grows stronger. For those who lived in these early settlements, the use of clay must have transformed daily life in subtle but profound ways. The ability to store food more securely, to cook in new ways, and to build more durable structures would have changed the rhythm of seasons, allowing families to prepare for lean months with greater confidence. Clay vessels and bricks tied people more firmly to their camps, making each return more rewarding and each departure more difficult. The material drawn from the earth beneath their feet becomes a partner in the transition to settled life. The story of clay in early human history is not one of sudden revolution, but of gradual entanglement. It begins with simple uses, lining pits, patching hearths, and grows into pottery figurines and bricks. Each step makes staying in place easier, more practical, and more meaningful. Clay embodies the earth itself, shaped by human hands, hardened by fire, and enduring across generations. In this way, it symbolizes the broader transformation of human life in the Holocene, where people move from wandering across landscapes to shaping the land and its materials into lasting homes. The earth beneath their feet, once merely ground to walk upon, becomes the foundation of permanence. As the Holocene unfolds, human groups who return each year to harvest wild cereals begin to notice patterns in how plants grow. Seeds dropped near camps sprout in disturbed soil, producing stands of grain closer to dwellings than in the wild fields. Over time, people experiment scattering seeds deliberately in areas where they might be easier to gather in the following season. This quiet practice marks the first steps toward cultivation, a gradual transformation that alters the relationship between humans and plants. The promise of domesticated crops lies not in sudden discovery, but in the accumulation of small observations, experiments, and choices that span generations. Archaeological evidence for this transition appears in sites such as Abu Huraira in northern Syria, where layers reveal an increasing reliance on rye and barley. Early on, these cereals appear as wild varieties, their tough husks and brittle stalks suited for dispersal in the natural world. Later layers show signs of change, grains larger and stalks less brittle, traits that emerge when humans select seeds for replanting. Such shifts reflect unconscious domestication, the result of repeated gathering and sowing of the plants most useful to people. Over centuries, human preference reshapes the genetics of plants, binding their survival to human activity. A detail often overlooked is the presence of small cultivation plots near early settlements. Archaeologists infer their existence from clusters of seeds found within sites, sometimes mixed with weeds associated with disturbed soil. These weeds thrive only where land is cleared or turned, suggesting that people deliberately altered the ground. Such evidence points to gardens or small fields tended not with plows or irrigation, but with simple digging sticks and hand scattering. The scale is modest, yet its significance immense, for it shows humans moving from gatherers of abundance to managers of growth. Mysteries remain about how intentional this process was in its earliest stages. Did people understand that planting seeds would reliably yield crops, or did they simply observe that plants reappeared where seeds were spilled? Was domestication driven by necessity during times of scarcity, such as the Younger Dryas cold period, or by the opportunity of abundance in more favorable climates? The debate continues, for the archaeological record offers traces, but not intentions. What is clear is that by the early Neolithic, deliberate cultivation is widespread, anchoring communities to their fields and reshaping their landscapes. On the planetary scale, the domestication of plants coincides with the stabilization of the Holocene climate. After millennia of abrupt shifts, temperatures and rainfall patterns become more predictable, creating conditions where agriculture can thrive. This stability is not absolute. Droughts and floods still occur, but it is sufficient for long-term planning. Humans, once entirely at the mercy of shifting ecosystems, begin to mold ecosystems to their needs. The act of cultivation represents a turning point in the history of the biosphere, as plants once adapted to wild environments are drawn into human-created niches. The scale of this transformation can be imagined by comparing the yields of wild and cultivated cereals. A field of tended barley may produce several times more grain than an untended stand, and the grains are larger, easier to process, and more nourishing. Over time, this increase in productivity supports larger populations, enabling communities to grow beyond the size sustainable by foraging alone. To grasp the scale, one might note that a single hectare of cultivated wheat can provide food sufficient for dozens of people across a season, an efficiency unmatched by hunting or gathering. Yet cultivation does not replace foraging immediately. Early agriculturalists continued to hunt gazelle, gather nuts and fish in rivers. The transition is gradual, with cultivated plants supplementing rather than supplanting wild resources. This mixed strategy provides resilience, allowing communities to adapt to poor harvests or changes in animal migration. Archaeological layers from sites across the Levant show this blend, with bones of wild game lying alongside charred domesticated grains. The shift toward agriculture is not linear, but braided with strands of old and new weaving together. A lesser-known detail from this era is the presence of quern stones so large they weigh hundreds of kilograms, fixed in place within houses. These grinding tools are clearly intended for processing large quantities of grain far beyond the needs of occasional foraging. Their immobility signals not only permanence but also the centrality of cereals in diet and daily labor. Such stones become part of the household itself, inherited and reused across generations, their grooves deepening with each season's harvest. The domestication of plants also brings new mysteries of social life. Did the control of fields and harvest alter relationships within communities? Some archaeologists suggest that cultivation creates new dynamics of ownership and inheritance, as fields are harder to share than wild resources. The presence of storage facilities within houses rather than communal pits may indicate growing household autonomy. Yet it is unclear whether these changes immediately reshape social structures, or whether for centuries life continues much as before, with sharing and cooperation balancing private effort. The archaeology reveals hints, but not full answers, leaving the social consequences of early farming partly obscured. The landscapes themselves bear the marks of this transformation. Hillsides are cleared of shrubs to make space for cereals, and soils are disturbed year after year, altering their composition. Grazing animals, such as goats drawn to the fields, begin to play a role in shaping vegetation. Human presence moves from being a passing influence to a persistent force, altering ecosystems in ways that ripple outward. The domestication of plants is thus also the domestication of landscapes, the beginning of human-driven ecological change on a scale that continues today. For those who lived through it, the promise of domesticated plants must have appeared both practical and profound. The security of food that could be stored for months, even years, reduced the uncertainty of seasonal cycles. The ability to remain in one place to tend and harvest fields allowed children to grow up within familiar landscapes, building deeper ties to land and ancestry. The effort of sowing, weeding, and harvesting was immense, yet it offered a stability unknown to earlier generations. In the daily rhythm of tending fields, a new relationship with the earth took shape, one that would anchor humanity to villages, then towns, and eventually civilizations. The story of early cultivation is not one of sudden revolution, but of gradual entanglement, where humans and plants shape one another. Wild cereals, once scattered by wind and animals, now rely on humans for propagation. Humans, once free to roam widely, now rely on cereals for sustenance. Each reshapes the other's destiny, entwined in a partnership that alters the course of history. The promise of domesticated plants lies not only in calories and storage, but in permanence, in the possibility of rooting human life in place and time tethered to the cycles of growth and harvest. In this quiet transformation, the seeds of villages are sown. Among the earliest companions of human life in the emerging villages are animals that once roamed wild across the same landscapes. Wolves, skilled hunters, and scavengers begin to draw close to camps, attracted by scraps of food bones and the warmth of fires. Over generations, some wolves grow less wary, lingering at the edges of human settlement until bonds begin to form. Through mutual tolerance and selective partnership, these animals slowly change, becoming dogs, creatures that bridge the boundary between wild and domestic, between wilderness and hearth. Their presence by the fire is one of the first signs that humans are no longer alone in shaping the course of sedentary life. Archaeological evidence for this bond is found in burials where dogs are interred alongside humans, a striking sign of companionship. At the Natufian site of Ain Malaha in Israel, dating to about 12,000 years ago, the remains of a woman are buried with a puppy resting against her. Such finds reveal more than practical use. They suggest affection, ritual, or symbolic connection. Dogs are not simply tools for hunting or guards for camps. They are companions woven into the social fabric of early communities. One lesser-known detail is the variation in dog size and form during these early millennia. Some of the earliest domesticated dogs are small, perhaps better suited to living within camps, while others resemble their wolf ancestors more closely. This diversity reflects different roles and degrees of domestication. Some may have been valued for guarding food stores, others for assisting in hunts, and still others simply for their presence. The variety shows that domestication is not a single event, but a spectrum of relationships shaped by the needs and choices of different groups. Mysteries remain about how domestication truly began. Did humans deliberately raise wolf pups, taming them through careful care? Or did wolves self-domesticate by choosing to live near humans, selecting themselves for tameness, generation by generation? The archaeological record offers no definitive answer, and scholars continue to debate the pathways. What is clear is that by the time the first villages emerge, dogs are firmly established as part of human life. Their bones are found in settlements, their images sometimes etched into objects, and their presence felt in the continuity of hearth and home. At the planetary scale, the domestication of dogs represents a profound moment in the history of life on Earth. For the first time, a large predator species is drawn into the human sphere, its survival bound to human activity. This bond foreshadows the domestication of other animals, sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs, but dogs come first, setting a precedent for human-animal partnerships that will reshape ecosystems worldwide. The spread of dogs mirrors the spread of humans from the Near East into Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, a shared journey that alters the balance of predator and prey across continents. The scale of the dog's contribution to human life is difficult to measure but immense. A single dog may guard a camp at night, warning of predators or strangers. Several dogs together may help hunt gazelle or deer, driving game toward hunters. In each case, the presence of dogs multiplies human effort, making survival more secure. To imagine the difference, one might compare a lone hunter following tracks with a hunter accompanied by dogs whose senses of smell and hearing extend human awareness many times over. The partnership expands human capacity, allowing communities to thrive in ways that would otherwise be more difficult. The bones of early dogs show signs of close living with humans. Some display tooth wear, suggesting diets of cooked food, while others show healed injuries that imply care during recovery. These details, though small, speak to a deeper relationship. They reveal that dogs are fed, tended, and valued beyond immediate utility. The burial at Ain Malaha is only one example of this bond, but it highlights a relationship that is emotional as well as practical, a companionship that shapes daily life. Yet uncertainties remain about how universal this bond was in its earliest stages. Not all communities adopt dogs, and some may have resisted their presence. The process of domestication is not uniform, and in some regions, wolves remain wild, avoiding human contact. The story of dogs is thus both global and local, reflecting the choices of individual groups as they adapt to changing ecologies. The mystery lies in why some groups embraced dogs early while others did not, a question that continues to intrigue researchers. The role of dogs in early villages extends beyond hunting and guarding. Their presence may also shape social organization. Dogs require feeding and care, creating responsibilities that may reinforce cooperation within households. They also serve as symbols of continuity, linking families to their past and to the land they inhabit. In later traditions, dogs appear in myths and rituals, often associated with protection, guidance, or the threshold between worlds. It is possible that such associations trace back to these earliest bonds when the first dogs sat by the fire in human camps. The spread of dogs also illustrates the interweaving of human and animal history. As humans move into new regions, dogs move with them, adapting to diverse climates and ecologies. From the steppes of Central Asia to the forests of Europe, from the deserts of the Near East to the coasts of the Mediterranean, dogs accompany their human companions, shaping hunting strategies, settlement patterns, and social life. Their adaptability mirrors that of humans, reinforcing the partnership that will endure for millennia. For the people of the early villages, the dog's bark at night, its presence by the fire, and its companionship in the hunt become part of daily rhythm. The animal is both guardian and partner, its loyalty forged through shared survival. To live with dogs is to extend the human community beyond its own species, to include another creature in the circle of hearth and home. This expansion of companionship reflects the broader trajectory of early settlement, where humans begin to root themselves more deeply in place, shaping relationships not only with land and plants, but also with animals. The story of dogs by the fire is thus one of mutual transformation. Wolves, once fierce competitors, become partners, their evolution shaped by human needs. Humans, once solitary hunters, expand their social world to include another species, their survival strengthened by the bond. The permanence of the hearth and the loyalty of the dog together mark a new stage in human history where the boundaries of community stretch wider and the roots of settlement grow deeper. In the glow of firelight, as families grind grain and share meals, dogs lie nearby, watchful and enduring, the first domesticated animals to join the journey toward village life. Among the earliest true villages that archaeologists can identify, Jericho stands out as a remarkable example of permanence and scale. Located near an oasis in the Jordan Valley, Jericho benefits from a reliable spring that provides water even during dry seasons. This dependable source of life allows human groups to remain year-round, cultivating plants, tending herds, and building structures that endure across centuries. By around 10,000 years ago, Jericho has become more than a seasonal camp. It is a settlement with hundreds of people, stone houses, storage facilities, and most striking of all, walls and towers that mark the first large-scale communal architecture in human history. The archaeological record at Jericho reveals layers of occupation stretching back thousands of years. Early structures are round houses built of mud brick with plastered floors and hearths at their centers. Over time, these houses become more complex, shifting to rectangular shapes that allow for denser arrangement and shared walls. This architectural change signals a growing population and the need for more organized living space. The houses cluster tightly together, forming neighborhoods that hint at emerging forms of community life far beyond what seasonal camps could sustain. One detail of particular significance is the construction of Jericho's massive stone wall and tower, dating to around 8,000 BCE. The wall, several meters high and thick, encircles part of the settlement, while the tower, standing 9 meters tall, rises within it. The scale of these structures is extraordinary for the time. Building them requires coordinated labor planning and leadership, suggesting that the community is organized in ways unknown to earlier groups. The purpose of the wall and tower is debated. Some argue that they defend against human threats, while others suggest protection from floods caused by seasonal runoff. Another interpretation is that they serve a symbolic or ritual role, binding the community together through monumental construction. Whatever their purpose, they represent the earliest known large-scale communal architecture in the world. The presence of plastered skulls within Jericho adds another layer to the story. Archaeologists have uncovered burials where skulls are removed, plastered with lime, to recreate facial features and then displayed or kept within houses. This practice suggests that memory and ancestry are central to village life. The plastered skulls may serve as ancestors, watching over the living, reinforcing ties between generations and strengthening community identity. Such rituals are lesser known but crucial details of early village culture, showing that settlement is not only about subsistence, but also about meaning and continuity. Mysteries remain about Jericho's walls and tower. Were they truly defensive or primarily symbolic? If they defended against enemies, who were those enemies, given that population density in the region was still relatively low? If they served ritual purposes, what ceremonies took place at the tower's base, and what beliefs did they embody? Archaeologists can measure the stones and analyze the plaster, but the intentions of those who built remain beyond reach. These uncertainties remind us that the first villages are as much cultural as practical, shaped by ideas and beliefs, as well as by needs. At the planetary scale, Jericho's emergence illustrates the broader trend of human communities anchoring themselves in stable environments. Across the world, as glaciers retreat and climates stabilize, similar settlements appear: Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, Jarmo in the Zagros, and others in China and Mesoamerica centuries later. Jericho is not unique in its permanence, but among the earliest and most visible preserved by the dry conditions of the Jordan Valley. Its existence shows that humans, once wanderers, are now capable of building structures that endure for generations, altering landscapes in ways visible even millennia later. The scale of Jericho's construction can be appreciated by comparing the labor required. The tower alone, with its 9-meter height and stone staircase, would demand thousands of work hours to quarry, transport, and fit stones. For a community of a few hundred people, such effort represents a major investment far beyond immediate subsistence. It demonstrates the capacity of early villages to mobilize collective labor for shared projects, a hallmark of later civilizations. To imagine the scale, one might consider that the tower is as tall as a 3-story building built without metal tools or draft animals, relying solely on human effort. Daily life in Jericho reflects the interplay of old and new. People cultivate wheat and barley, grind grain on heavy querns, and store it in clay-lined pits. They herd goats and sheep, animals that provide milk, meat, and hides. Yet, hunting and gathering continue with gazelle bones, and wild plant remains, showing that older practices endure alongside farming. Houses are repaired and rebuilt with mud brick, each generation laying new layers over the old. The village grows not through sudden change, but through steady accumulation, each season adding to the depth of occupation. A lesser-known aspect of Jericho's history is the use of lime plaster on house floors and walls. Producing plaster requires burning limestone at high temperatures, a process that consumes large amounts of fuel and demands careful control of fire. The widespread use of plaster at Jericho suggests technological sophistication and the availability of resources to support it. These gleaming white floors would have transformed the interiors of houses, creating clean, durable surfaces that reflect light. The choice to invest in plaster reveals a concern with permanence and aesthetics, showing that even in early villages, people seek to shape not only their survival, but the quality of their living spaces. The story of Jericho also raises questions about the social structures that sustain such a settlement. Who organizes the labor to build walls and towers? How are decisions made about communal resources and construction? Archaeologists find no clear evidence of kings or chiefs. Yet the coordination required suggests some form of leadership. Whether through councils, elders, or ritual specialists, Jericho's community must have developed mechanisms of cooperation that transcend small family groups. These mechanisms represent the seeds of more complex societies to come. For those who lived within Jericho's walls, life must have felt both secure and constrained. The presence of permanent houses and communal structures offered stability unknown to their ancestors, yet it also tied them to one place. Fields required tending, walls required repair, and herds demanded daily care. Mobility, once the core of survival, now yielded to permanence with all the opportunities and burdens it entailed. The walls that protected also enclosed, defining the boundaries of community and shaping the rhythm of life within. Jericho and its walls stand as symbols of the broader human transition from wandering to settlement. They embody the permanence of place, the capacity for collective labor, and the intertwining of subsistence with ritual and memory. They show that villages are not simply the result of agriculture, but the outcome of choices, experiments, and beliefs woven together across generations. In the stones of Jericho's walls and the plaster of its floors, we see the beginnings of human architecture, society, and permanence foundations upon which the long story of civilization will be built. In the uplands of southeastern Anatolia, far from the fields of barley and the clustered houses of the Jordan Valley, a different kind of permanence emerges. Here at sites like Göbekli Tepe, people construct monuments not for dwelling, but for gathering, not for storage, but for ritual. The ground is shaped into circular enclosures, each defined by massive stone pillars carved from bedrock and arranged in rings. At the center of these rings stand towering T-shaped monoliths, some reaching 5 meters in height. Their surfaces adorned with carvings of animals, lions, snakes, boars, vultures. These stones, raised around 11,000 years ago, represent one of the earliest known monumental structures built by humans, predating the widespread adoption of farming. Their existence reveals that the first villages are not only about food and shelter, but also about ceremony, belief, and the binding of communities through shared ritual. The labor required to build these enclosures is immense. Each pillar weighing several tons must be quarried, shaped with stone tools, and transported across uneven ground. Dozens of people working in concert are needed to raise them upright. Such efforts demand organization and shared purpose, suggesting that rituals and gatherings are powerful enough to unite groups from across the region. Unlike Jericho, Göbekli Tepe shows no evidence of permanent houses, hearths, or fields. It appears instead as a place of congregation where people who may have lived in smaller camps elsewhere come together for ceremonies. This contrast highlights the diversity of early human settlement. Some communities anchor themselves through agriculture and architecture, others through ritual gatherings marked by stone. One detail of significance is the presence of carved reliefs on the pillars. These images are not random but carefully arranged, depicting animals that may have carried symbolic meaning. Vultures, often shown with outstretched wings, appear frequently, possibly linked to practices of excarnation, where bodies are exposed to birds before burial. Snakes coil along the sides of pillars, perhaps symbolizing danger, rebirth, or the underworld. The imagery suggests a worldview deeply tied to the natural world, where animals embody powers or meanings that structure human ritual. These carvings offer one of the earliest glimpses into symbolic life on a monumental scale. The purpose of Göbekli Tepe and similar sites remains a subject of debate. Were they temples, communal gathering places, or ritual centers tied to seasonal feasts? Some archaeologists propose that the labor of building and maintaining these sites fosters social bonds, uniting groups through shared effort. Others suggest that rituals held here help coordinate exchange marriage or alliances among scattered bands. The absence of domestic structures leaves the mystery unresolved. What is clear is that these enclosures represent an investment of time and energy that goes far beyond immediate survival, showing that ritual and belief are as central to the birth of villages as food and shelter. On the planetary scale, the construction of ritual monuments coincides with a broader pattern of humans shaping landscapes not only for subsistence, but for meaning. Across the world, early peoples erect mounds, align stones, or mark sacred sites with earth and timber. These actions reveal a shared impulse to anchor belief in the physical world, to give permanence to ritual through structures that endure beyond the moment of ceremony. Göbekli Tepe stands as one of the earliest and most striking examples, but it is part of a wider human pattern of inscribing meaning on land. The scale of construction at Göbekli Tepe can be measured in tons of stone. Some enclosures contain pillars weighing up to 20 tons, set into sockets carved from bedrock. The organization required to quarry, move, and raise such stones rivals that of much later civilizations. To imagine the scale, one might picture dozens of people hauling a monolith the length of a modern bus, maneuvering it into position with ropes, levers, and sheer persistence. Such feats testify to the collective will and shared purpose of early communities long before formal states or kings. A lesser-known detail about Göbekli Tepe is that it was deliberately buried after centuries of use. Archaeologists have found that the enclosures were filled with rubble, covering the pillars and preserving them beneath layers of earth. The reasons remain mysterious. Was it an act of ritual closure, marking the end of a sacred era? Was it practical, making space for new construction above? Or did shifting beliefs render the old enclosures obsolete? The deliberate burial adds a final layer of mystery to a site already rich with unanswered questions. The presence of ritual monuments challenges the assumption that agriculture alone drives settlement. At Göbekli Tepe, monumental architecture precedes full domestication of plants and animals. This sequence suggests that ritual and belief may have played a role in encouraging people to gather to stay longer, and eventually to cultivate food to support larger groups. In this interpretation, villages may arise not only from the practical demands of subsistence, but also from the symbolic needs of community and meaning. The interplay between ritual and subsistence remains a central question in understanding early human settlement. For those who participated in ceremonies at sites like Göbekli Tepe, the experience must have been profound. Approaching the enclosure, they would see massive stones rising from the earth carved with familiar yet powerful animals. Within the circle, fires may have burned, feasts may have been shared, and rituals performed beneath the looming presence of the pillars. The act of gathering, of standing together within a stone circle shaped by human hands, would have reinforced the bonds of community and the sense of belonging to something greater than the individual. The permanence of stone gave form to belief, making intangible ideas visible and enduring. Elsewhere in other early villages, ritual takes different forms. At Jericho, plastered skulls connect the living with ancestors. At Ain Ghazal in Jordan, large clay statues are created and buried in pits, their purpose unknown, but clearly ritual in nature. These practices show that across the Near East, early settled communities invest in ritual alongside agriculture, embedding belief into the foundations of village life. Ritual is not separate from settlement, but intertwined with it, shaping how people live together and how they understand their place in the world. The story of rituals in stone and earth reminds us that villages are not merely collections of houses and fields. They are also centers of meaning where belief and memory are inscribed in durable forms. Whether through stone pillars carved with animals, plastered skulls, honoring ancestors, or clay statues hidden beneath floors, early humans seek to anchor their intangible worlds in tangible materials. These practices show that permanence is not only about walls and fields, but also about symbols and ceremonies, about the need to bind communities through shared acts that transcend daily survival. In the stones of Göbekli Tepe, in the skulls of Jericho, and in the statues of Ain Ghazal, we see the foundations of ritual life that accompany the first villages. These monuments and practices reveal that the story of human settlement is as much about meaning as it is about food, as much about belief as it is about subsistence. They remind us that the first villages are not only places of labor and harvest, but also places of memory, ceremony, and enduring connection between people, land, and the unseen world. As villages grow from clusters of seasonal huts into permanent settlements, a new challenge emerges. People must now live side by side in ways that foraging groups never experienced. For tens of thousands of years, mobility allowed humans to disperse. When tensions arose, to move on, when resources dwindled or disagreements festered. In villages, however, departure becomes less feasible. Fields required tending houses are rooted in mud brick and plaster, and storage pits hold food that cannot easily be carried away. Families find themselves bound to neighbors, sharing walls, water, and paths, creating conditions for cooperation, but also for conflict. This tension of crowding is one of the defining features of early village life. Archaeological evidence reflects the density of these settlements. At sites like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, dating to around 7500 BCE, hundreds of mud brick houses are built tightly against one another without streets or alleys. People enter their homes through roofs, climbing ladders, and crossing over the dwellings of others. Such proximity fosters intense social interaction. Neighbors hear one another's conversations, smell one another's fires, and share common walls that must be maintained collectively. The density of life in such villages marks a dramatic departure from the dispersed camps of foragers. One detail that illustrates this new reality is the presence of shared refuse areas and middens where households discard ash bones and broken tools. These accumulations of debris testify to the sheer scale of daily life concentrated in one place. They also reveal that communities develop systems for managing waste, an issue rarely encountered in mobile groups. The management of refuse, along with water and food storage, reflects the challenges of density and the need for cooperation in maintaining communal space. Mysteries remain about how conflicts were resolved in these early settlements. Archaeologists find evidence of injuries on skeletal remains that suggest interpersonal violence, yet also of shared projects such as wall construction and communal rituals. Were disputes managed through councils of elders, through ritual reconciliation, or through social norms that reinforced cooperation? The absence of written records leaves these questions unanswered. What is clear is that living in close quarters demands new forms of negotiation rules and shared identity. The seeds of social complexity and perhaps of governance lie within the crowded walls of early villages. At the planetary scale, the tension of crowding reflects a broader phenomenon, the clustering of human populations in specific ecological niches. With the stabilization of the Holocene climate, fertile valleys, plains, and oases become magnets for settlement. Populations grow in these favorable regions, while other landscapes remain sparsely inhabited. The pattern of crowding is not uniform across the globe, but localized, yet its implications are profound. Human density creates opportunities for cultural exchange, innovation, and ritual, but also for conflict, disease, and environmental stress. The scale of population concentration in villages can be illustrated by comparing them to earlier camps. A mobile group of foragers might number 20 to 40 people moving together across wide ranges. In contrast, a village like Jericho may hold several hundred, while Çatalhöyük may house thousands. To imagine the difference is to consider the leap from a small extended family group to a community the size of a modern town square. The density of life transforms not only logistics, but also psychology, shaping how people conceive of themselves in relation to others. A lesser-known detail about Çatalhöyük is the way households maintain symbolic individuality despite crowding. Each house contains its own hearth, its own storage bins, and often its own burials beneath the floors. Walls are painted with elaborate murals depicting hunting scenes, animals or geometric designs, and plaster reliefs of bullhorns or leopards adorn interiors. These decorations suggest that even within crowded conditions, families assert identity and continuity through art and ritual. The tension of crowding is balanced by the need to distinguish households to create spaces of meaning within the larger mass of the settlement. The risks of disease also increase in dense villages. Archaeological evidence from skeletal remains shows signs of infections and stress that may be linked to close living conditions and reliance on domesticated animals. Goats, sheep, and cattle kept near houses introduce new pathogens into human populations. The sharing of wells and storage facilities facilitates the spread of illness. While foraging groups are not free from disease, their mobility limits its persistence. Villages, by contrast, create conditions where pathogens can circulate and endure. This hidden cost of crowding becomes one of the enduring challenges of settled life. The presence of communal structures in villages suggests attempts to manage and mitigate the strains of density. At Çatalhöyük, some buildings appear larger and more elaborately decorated, possibly serving as gathering places for rituals or meetings. At Jericho, the great tower and walls may not only symbolize unity, but also function as communal projects that channel collective labor. Such structures help bind communities together, providing shared identity and purpose amid the friction of daily proximity. They demonstrate that the solution to crowding lies not only in practical adjustments, but also in symbolic acts that reinforce cohesion. Yet, mysteries remain about the balance between cooperation and conflict in early villages. Did shared projects truly reduce tension, or did they create hierarchies of labor and authority? Did households act independently, or within larger kinship networks? Archaeology reveals patterns but not motivations, leaving us to infer from material remains the lived experience of crowded settlement. The tension of crowding is thus both visible in architecture and elusive in human behavior. For those who lived in these early villages, the experience must have been both reassuring and challenging. The proximity of neighbors meant that help was near in times of need, that food could be shared, and that rituals could be performed with greater participation. Yet it also meant that disputes over resources, noise, or space could not be escaped. The walls that protected from the outside world also enclosed the intensity of the inside. The rhythm of village life was one of negotiation, of balancing cooperation with individuality, of finding harmony in density. The story of crowding in the first villages highlights the dual nature of permanence. To live together in large numbers is to gain security, stability, and opportunity, but also to face new challenges of conflict, disease, and identity. The tension of crowding is not an incidental feature of village life, but its very essence shaping the evolution of social structures, rituals, and governance. In the packed houses of Çatalhöyük, in the plastered floors of Jericho, and in the middens of every early settlement, we see the evidence of this negotiation, the delicate balance that allows humans to remain together in one place. The first villages are not simply the product of agriculture or architecture. They are also experiments in social density and learning how to share space and resources with many others over long stretches of time. This experiment, begun in the mud brick houses of early Neolithic settlements, continues in every city and town today. The tension of crowding is one of the enduring legacies of the human choice to stop wandering and to live together in villages, a choice that binds us as tightly as the walls that once enclosed the earliest communities. As villages expand across the Fertile Crescent and beyond, they do not exist in isolation. Even though families now live more permanently in one place, their lives remain connected to distant landscapes through networks of movement, trade, and exchange. The first villages, while rooted, are also nodes in a web that stretches across valleys, mountains, and coasts. Archaeologists find the evidence of this web in materials that do not belong to local environments. Obsidian blades in the Levant, sourced from volcanoes in Anatolia, seashells found hundreds of kilometers inland, and pigments carried from remote mountains. These artifacts reveal that early communities maintained connections across long distances, ensuring that mobility is not lost but transformed into exchange. The circulation of obsidian is one of the clearest examples. Obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its sharpness, is found at sources such as Cappadocia in central Anatolia. Yet obsidian blades and flakes appear in sites far to the south, carried over hundreds of kilometers. Their presence suggests not only the movement of goods, but also the movement of ideas and people. Villages that lack local access to obsidian rely on exchange networks to obtain it, embedding themselves in broader systems of interaction. This trade is not commercial in the modern sense, but embedded in social relationships. Gifts, alliances, marriages, and rituals that bind communities together. A lesser-known detail is the role of marine shells in inland settlements. At sites like Ain Malaha and Jericho, beads made from Mediterranean shells appear sometimes strung together into necklaces or sewn into clothing. These objects travel across deserts and mountains carried by traders or exchanged hand to hand through chains of interaction. Their presence shows that even as humans settle, they continue to value connection to distant worlds, the sea, the mountains, the horizons beyond their immediate fields. Shells, delicate and useless for subsistence, carry symbolic meaning, perhaps as tokens of beauty, identity, or belonging. The unresolved mystery lies in the organization of these exchanges. Were there specialized traders who moved between villages, or did exchange occur mainly through occasional gatherings and feasts where groups met to share goods? Archaeologists debate whether early trade was structured or opportunistic. The presence of standardized obsidian tools in some sites hints at organized systems, while the variety of shell ornaments suggests more informal exchange. Without written records, the nature of these networks remains uncertain. What is clear is that exchange existed, connecting early villages across wide distances and embedding them in social worlds larger than their immediate surroundings. At the planetary scale, the emergence of exchange networks reflects a broader pattern of human connectivity. As populations cluster in fertile valleys, distances between communities shrink relative to population density. Rivers, mountains, and coasts become corridors of movement, linking villages in chains of interaction. The flow of goods across these networks parallels the flow of ideas and technologies. The spread of domesticated plants and animals across regions is facilitated by these connections, ensuring that innovations do not remain isolated but diffuse widely. The web of exchange becomes one of the engines of human transformation. The scale of these exchanges can be grasped by considering distances. Obsidian from Anatolia travels over 500 kilometers to reach the Levant. Shells from the Mediterranean are carried inland across the Jordan Valley and into highland settlements. To imagine this one might consider journeys longer than a week's walk across varied and difficult terrain, repeated often enough to sustain regular flows of materials. Such distances testify to the persistence of human interaction even when rooted in permanent villages. Settlement does not end mobility. It redirects it into networks of connection. Archaeological evidence from Çatalhöyük offers striking examples of this web. Alongside local materials, excavators find obsidian blades from Cappadocia shell ornaments, likely from the Mediterranean, and pigments such as cinnabar that come from distant sources. The presence of these materials within houses, sometimes associated with burials, shows that they carry meaning beyond utility. Obsidian provides sharp cutting edges, but it also symbolizes connection to distant landscapes. Shells adorn the dead, linking them to worlds beyond their village. Pigments decorate walls, turning houses into canvases of identity and belief. Exchange